In 334 BC, Alexander, the king of Macedonia, initiated one of the most significant military campaigns in history against the dominant power of the time, the Persian Empire. At the age of 20, his exceptional and audacious leadership resulted in a series of victories in battle. Over the course of an extraordinary 10-year campaign that extended to the peripheries of the known world, he established one of the largest empires in history. Few individuals have exerted such a profound influence on the trajectory of historical events. To the Persians, he was known as Alexander the Accursed, while in the Western narrative, he is celebrated as Alexander the Great. The region of ancient Greece, from approximately 500 BC, witnessed remarkable advancements in art, philosophy, and military strategy. Its two principal city-states were Athens, recognized for its naval prowess and the flourishing of democracy, art, drama, and philosophy, and Sparta, characterized by its austere militaristic culture and renowned for its formidable military forces. In 480 BC, these two city-states allied to confront an invasion by the formidable Persian Empire. At the narrow pass of Thermopylae, a small contingent of Greek forces, led by 300 Spartans, successfully held off the vast Persian army for 3 days before being encircled and ultimately killed. Subsequently, in the Straits of Salamis, the Greek fleet achieved a decisive victory over the Persian navy, although they were unable to prevent the Persians from incinerating the sacred temples of the Athenian Acropolis. The following year, at the Battle of Plataea, the Greeks secured a significant land victory against the Persians, compelling them to retreat from their invasion. The subsequent 50 years marked the golden age of classical Greece. However, escalating tensions between Athens and Sparta, along with their respective allies, ultimately precipitated a protracted conflict that engulfed the Greek world in decades of destructive warfare. The internecine wars among the Greek city-states persisted for nearly a century, leaving them weakened and susceptible to the emergence of a new power from the north. For centuries, the sophisticated Greeks regarded the mountainous kingdom of Macedonia as a peripheral region, often dismissing it as only marginally Greek. However, under the leadership of King Philip II, Macedonia transformed into a formidable military power. One of his most notable reforms was the introduction of the sarissa, an 18-foot pike that was twice the length of the standard Greek spear, which was utilized by trained infantry operating in close formation, known as a phalanx. In 338 BC, during the Battle of Chaeronea, Philip's forces decisively defeated the combined armies of Thebes and Athens. Through a combination of alliances and military conquests, Philip had already established dominance over most of his neighboring territories. Following this significant victory, he unified all of Greece under an alliance known as the Hellenic League, or League of Corinth, with Philip assuming the role of hegemon, or supreme commander, while Sparta remained aloof. Philip then began to strategize a grand campaign for a pan-Hellenic war against the Persian Empire, which was perceived as a declining superpower with its vast wealth vulnerable to conquest. However, on the eve of this military endeavor, Philip was assassinated by his own bodyguard, a casualty of the intense rivalries within the Macedonian court. He was succeeded by his 20-year-old son, Alexander, who was not only intellectually gifted, having been tutored by the esteemed philosopher Aristotle, but also an experienced military leader. Alexander inherited his father's ambitious plan to invade Persia, but first he needed to consolidate his authority as king. He executed potential rivals and quelled uprisings in Illyria, Thessaly, and central Greece, making a particularly harsh example of Thebes by completely annihilating the city and enslaving its inhabitants. In the spring of 334 BC, now prepared to commence his campaign against the Persian Empire, Alexander led his army across the Hellespont into Asia Minor, marking the beginning of one of the most significant military campaigns in history. Alexander's military force comprised approximately 40,000 troops, sourced from various regions of Greece. The infantry was under the command of the experienced Macedonian general Parmenion. At the forefront of the formation were 9,000 Macedonian phalangites, equipped with the 18-foot sarissa. These soldiers were professional and extensively trained, organized into a phalanx formation that consisted of 16 ranks. This dense arrangement created a formidable barrier of iron spear tips, rendering it nearly invulnerable. However, the phalanx was also challenging to maneuver and particularly susceptible to assaults on its flanks or rear. To mitigate this vulnerability, 3,000 elite infantry known as hypaspists, or shield-bearers, armed with shorter spears, were positioned to protect the flanks, under the command of Nicanor, Parmenian's son. The second line of Alexander's forces included 7,000 Greek allies and 5,000 mercenaries, who were armed as hoplites. The term hoplite derives from the hoplon, their large round shield, and these soldiers wielded shorter 8-foot spears. Although the hoplite phalanx was not as effective as that of the Macedonian phalangites, it was still well armed and heavily armored for its time. The Agrianes, recognized as the army's elite skirmishers, were proficient javelin throwers hailing from what is now southern Bulgaria. Additional skirmishers from Thrace and Illyria were equipped with javelins, slings, and bows. The shock troops of Alexander's army were the companion cavalry, consisting of 1,800 elite horsemen armed with javelins, spears, and swords, commanded by Philotas, another son of Parmenion. Alexander himself led the royal squadron. The cavalry contingent also included 1,800 troops from Thessaly, commanded by Callus, 600 from other Greek regions under the leadership of Erigaius, and 900 mounted scouts from Thrace and Paeonia, led by Cassander. In response to Alexander's impending invasion, the governors of the Persian Empire, which was divided into provinces known as satrapies, convened to deliberate on their strategy. Memnon of Rhodes, a skilled Greek general serving the Persians, advised against engaging in direct battle with Alexander. Instead, he recommended a scorched earth strategy, advocating for the destruction of villages and crops while retreating to the interior. Alexander's forces were anticipated to face rapid starvation, a strategic recommendation that the satraps ultimately rejected, opting instead to confront Alexander's army at the Granicus River. The Persian military established its position behind the shallow yet 60-foot-wide river, characterized by steep banks. Their front line consisted of approximately 10,000 cavalrymen drawn from various regions of the empire, including Medes and Harconians from present-day Iran, Bactrians from Afghanistan, and Paphlagonians from Turkey's Black Sea coast. In reserve, several thousand Greek mercenaries, a common component of Persian armies during this period, were positioned behind the cavalry. These mercenaries, motivated by Persian gold, were equipped with the traditional round shield and short spear of hoplites. The Persians may have harbored doubts regarding the loyalty of these Greek soldiers in combat against their compatriots, which likely influenced their decision to place them at the rear. In a bid to decisively engage and dismantle the Persian forces before they could retreat, Alexander advanced towards the Granicus with his elite troops. He positioned Thessalian, Greek, and Thracian cavalry on his left flank under the command of Parmenion. The center was occupied by the phalanx, organized into 6 divisions led by commanders Perdiccas, Koinos, Amyntas, Philip, Meleager, and Crateros. On the right flank, Alexander himself commanded the companion cavalry, supported by the elite hypaspists, Agrianes javelin throwers, and archers. Although Alexander's total force of 13,000 infantry and 5,000 cavalry was likely slightly outnumbered, he disregarded counsel to delay the crossing until dawn and instead ordered an immediate assault. He dispatched a squadron of companion cavalry to ford the river, followed by a regiment of hypaspists and the Paeonian light cavalry. Rallying his troops to demonstrate their valor, Alexander led the right wing across the river. As they reached the midpoint of the river, the Greek forces were met with a barrage of javelins, darts, and arrows from the Persian line. Those who successfully reached the opposite bank were immediately engaged by the Persian cavalry. Alexander found himself at the center of the fray, attacking the concentration of Persian cavalry and their leaders. A fierce battle ensued, characterized by a chaotic clash of horses and men, with Macedonians striving to displace the Persians from the riverbank, while the Persians sought to thwart their advance and push them back into the river. Alexander's assault appeared to be impulsive. However, it served the strategic purpose of allowing the remainder of his forces, including the formidable Macedonian phalanx, to traverse the river. In a sudden turn of events, Alexander found himself engaged in a life-threatening confrontation with two Persian nobles. Rusaces approached Alexander and struck him on the head with his sword, resulting in a fragment of his helmet being dislodged. Fortunately, the helmet mitigated the impact of the blow, enabling Alexander to retaliate and defeat Rusaces with his lance. Subsequently, Spithridates attempted to attack Alexander from behind, but Black Cletus, son of Drapidas, preemptively intercepted him, severing his arm along with the sword. At this juncture, the Greek forces had successfully crossed the river, confronting the Persian cavalry with a formidable array of Macedonian spears, which prompted most of the Persian troops to retreat. The rapidity and shock of Alexander's offensive prevented the Greek mercenaries in Persian service from joining the fray. In a state of fury, possibly viewing the mercenaries as traitors, Alexander disregarded their pleas for clemency. Surrounded on all sides, the mercenaries faced a massacre. This decisive victory positioned Alexander favorably, granting him control over Asia Minor. However, the Persian Empire remained a vast entity of considerable wealth and influence, already mobilizing its extensive resources in preparation for confrontation. To secure his historical legacy through the conquest of this empire, Alexander would next need to confront Darius, the King of Kings. As Alexander approached Sardis, the capital of the Persian province of Lydia, its commander capitulated without resistance. Nevertheless, before advancing further, Alexander recognized the necessity of neutralizing Persian naval capabilities. The Persian fleet, with significant bases throughout the eastern Mediterranean, posed a potential threat to his lines of communication with Greece. Rather than engage the Persians at sea, Alexander opted to target their nearest coastal strongholds, the Greek cities of Miletus and Halicarnassus. Both cities mounted staunch resistance, but ultimately succumbed by winter. In the spring of 333 BC, Alexander resumed his campaign into Lycia and Phrygia. At Gordium, he encountered the famed Gordian knot, which was prophesied to be untied by the future ruler of Asia. In a decisive act, Alexander drew his sword and severed the knot. Meanwhile, Memnon of Rhodes, a proficient Greek general serving the Persians, led naval operations into the Aegean, capturing the islands of Chios and Lesbos. However, following Memnon's unexpected death from illness, the Persian offensive was discontinued. 18 months had elapsed since Alexander's army crossed the Hellespont and initiated its invasion of the Persian Empire. Now, as Alexander advanced into Cilicia, he was poised to cross the Aegean and the Taurus Mountains into Syria. However, the main Persian army, commanded by King Darius II himself, emerged from the north, positioning itself behind the Greek forces. Darius was resolutely intent on ensnaring and annihilating Alexander's forces, which he outnumbered nearly 2-1. To achieve this, he obstructed Alexander's sole avenue of retreat by positioning his army on the coastal plain near Isis, a narrow expanse measuring only 6 miles in width. This constrained battlefield, flanked by mountains and the sea, compelled Alexander to engage in combat while simultaneously inhibiting Darius from fully leveraging his significant numerical superiority. Estimates suggest that Darius commanded an army of up to 100,000 troops, comprising some of the most elite soldiers from his extensive empire, including 10,000 of his own household troops, known as the Immortals. His most proficient cavalry units were concentrated on his right flank, adjacent to the sea, where the terrain was more conducive to cavalry operations. The center of his formation was occupied by his Greek mercenary hoplites, while Persian infantry constituted the left wing. In preparation for battle, Alexander arranged his forces, once again assigning the left wing, closest to the sea, to Parmenion, who commanded the Greek cavalry and infantry. The Macedonian phalanx was positioned at the center, with Alexander himself and his most elite troops stationed on the right wing near the mountainous terrain. This contingent included his distinguished Agriane javelin throwers, archers, and, positioned behind them, the Hypaspists and companion cavalry. Upon observing the formidable Persian cavalry opposing Parmenion on the left, Alexander strategically relocated his Thessalian cavalry to bolster that flank. Despite his overwhelming numerical advantage, Darius maintained his position behind a minor river, the Pinarus, and awaited Alexander's assault. His anticipation was soon fulfilled as Alexander rallied his troops, exhorting them to demonstrate valor and naming several individuals to inspire them. Subsequently, at the forefront of his army's right wing, he initiated a charge. Once again, the rapidity and impact of the Macedonian advance caused the enemy to falter. However, the Macedonian phalanx encountered difficulties in the center of the battlefield. In its attempt to keep pace with Alexander, its formation became disordered, leading to intense combat with Darius's Greek mercenaries, which resulted in a gradual retreat of the phalanx. Recognizing the perilous situation, Alexander regrouped and led the companion cavalry in a direct assault on the Persian center. The Greek mercenaries, now threatened on their flank, quickly fell into disarray, allowing the Macedonian phalanx to regain its momentum. Alexander fought his way toward Darius himself, who, confronted by the seemingly reckless and intrepid Macedonian, chose to flee the battlefield in his royal chariot. The Macedonian left flank, commanded by Parmenion, engaged in a critical confrontation against the elite cavalry of the Persian forces. The potential for a Persian breakthrough posed a significant threat, as it could encircle Alexander's army and reverse the tide of battle. However, Parmenion and his troops exhibited remarkable resilience, successfully repelling the Persian advance. As news of Darius's retreat circulated among the Persian ranks, morale plummeted, leading to a disorganized withdrawal and resulting in a massacre. Ptolemy, one of Alexander's commanders, reported that the sheer number of Persian casualties was so great that they were utilized to fill a deep ravine, facilitating the Macedonian forces' passage. The Battle of Issus culminated in a decisive victory for Alexander, who captured Darius's wife, mother, and 3 children, treating them with respect and care. With the Persian field army in retreat, Alexander shifted his focus to the western territories of the Persian Empire. In 332 BCE, the coastal cities of Phoenicia capitulated, effectively dismantling Persian naval dominance in the Mediterranean. However, the island city of Tyre mounted a staunch defense. The defenders engaged in fierce and skillful resistance, even as Alexander commenced the construction of a causeway to the island, which was fortified by 2 massive siege towers. They countered with incendiary ships. After a protracted 7-month siege, the city walls were ultimately breached, leading to Tyre's fall, with a significant portion of its populace either killed or enslaved. Gaza also succumbed to siege tactics. Alexander then advanced to Pelusium in the Nile Delta, where the Persian governor of Egypt surrendered the province and its royal treasury to him. In Memphis, the local priests hailed Alexander as a liberator from Persian domination and crowned him pharaoh. At the Nile's mouth, he established a new city, Alexandria, before journeying to the desert oracle of Siwa, where, according to some accounts, the priests acknowledged him as the son of Amun, the king of the gods. Returning east to Tyre in 331 BCE, Alexander received troubling news from his homeland. Despite his significant victories over the Persians, he faced opposition, as many Greeks viewed him as a tyrant. King Aegeus of Sparta, with Persian backing, instigated a revolt against Macedonian rule. Antipater, Alexander's commander in Greece, was already contending with insurrections in Thrace, but promptly advanced southward to confront Aegeus in battle near Megalopolis. Even the renowned Spartan warriors proved unable to withstand the might of the Macedonian military. The Spartan military was decisively defeated, with King Aegeus among the casualties. With his stronghold in Greece re-established, Alexander proceeded towards the core of the Persian Empire, aiming for a conclusive confrontation with Darius. He received a correspondence from the Persian monarch, proposing a substantial sum of gold, his daughter's hand in marriage, and half of his empire in exchange for peace. However, Alexander's remarkable victories, coupled with the prophecies and public acclaim he had garnered, led him to believe that his fate was to dominate the world. Consequently, he declined the Persian king's proposal, expressing his ambition to acquire the entirety of the empire rather than merely a portion. In 334 BC, at the age of 21, Alexander, the sovereign of the relatively small Greek kingdom of Macedonia, initiated an invasion of the expansive Persian Empire. Despite the seemingly insurmountable odds, the superiority of Greek military tactics and Alexander's audacious leadership resulted in significant victories against the Persians at the Granicus River and at Issus. Having subdued the Persian territories west of the Euphrates River, he directed his efforts eastward into the heart of the empire, anticipating a final confrontation with Darius III. Upon learning that a formidable Persian army, commanded by Darius, had gathered at Gaugamela near present-day Mosul in Iraq, he advanced towards it. This engagement represented Darius's last opportunity to halt Alexander's advance, while simultaneously providing Alexander with the chance to dismantle Persian dominance permanently. Darius opted to engage in battle on open terrain, where his numerical superiority could be more effectively leveraged. His forces had diligently prepared the battlefield, clearing and leveling the ground to accommodate Persian war chariots. Contemporary estimates suggest that the Persian army comprised between 100,000 and 200,000 troops, drawn from various regions of the empire, including infantry from Syria and Babylonia, cavalry from Armenia, India and Central Asia, as well as up to 200 scythed chariots and a limited number of war elephants. In contrast, Alexander's forces were smaller and potentially outnumbered by a ratio of 2-to-1. He arranged his troops in a traditional formation, with Thracian and Thessalian cavalry under the command of Parmenion, positioned on the left flank. The center was occupied by the Macedonian phalanx veterans, each equipped with an 18-foot sarissa pike. On the right flank, Alexander commanded his elite cavalry, the Companions, alongside his most capable infantry, the Hypaspists, which he intended to utilize for the primary assault. Greek hoplites constituted a secondary line, providing support to both flanks, which were angled backward to prevent encirclement by the Persian forces. The battle commenced when Alexander executed a strategic maneuver by advancing his wing to the right, which caught the Persian forces off guard. This action raised the possibility that Alexander intended to encircle their substantial army. In response, the Persians mirrored his movement, reallocating troops from their center to outflank Alexander and to prevent him from exiting the area designated for the Persian chariots. However, Alexander's unconventional tactic was a calculated trap designed to lure the Persians into weakening their central formation. Upon recognizing the success of this ploy, he commanded his Greek cavalry to charge, thereby immobilizing the Persian forces. A significant cavalry engagement ensued on the right flank. Meanwhile, Darius, perceiving this as a critical juncture, deployed his chariots. However, the skilled Agrianis javelin throwers effectively neutralized both the horses and their crews, while the Greek infantry created pathways for the chariots to pass without inflicting damage. Subsequently, Alexander led his companion cavalry and segments of the Macedonian phalanx in a direct assault on the compromised Persian center, advancing towards Darius himself. The abrupt intensity of Alexander's attack incited panic among the Persians, resulting in a collapse of their central forces, with King Darius himself leading the retreat. Conversely, Alexander's left flank encountered significant challenges as Parmenion faced a formidable onslaught from Persian cavalry and found himself nearly encircled. Notably, Indian and Scythian horsemen had penetrated a gap in the Greek line but chose to continue towards the Greek camp to loot rather than engage in a rear attack. In a state of desperation, Parmenion appealed to Alexander for assistance. In response, Alexander abandoned his pursuit of Darius, regrouped, and launched an assault on the Persian right flank. This segment of the battle was marked by intense and bloody combat, resulting in the loss of 60 of Alexander's companions. Ultimately, as news of Darius's flight disseminated throughout the battlefield, the remaining Persian cavalry retreated. The Battle of Gaugamela culminated in a remarkable and decisive victory for Alexander, with ancient accounts indicating that he suffered only a few hundred casualties, while the Persians incurred thousands. Alexander's triumph effectively dismantled Darius's formidable army, thereby clearing the path to Babylon, the principal capital of the empire. Upon entering the city in a display of triumph, Alexander was acknowledged by Persian officials as the new legitimate ruler. This recognition was similarly extended in the city of Susa, where Alexander ceremonially ascended the royal throne of Persia. In the Zagros Mountains, specifically at a location referred to as the Persian Gates, a valiant Persian contingent successfully impeded the advance of Alexander's forces for a duration of 1 month. Ultimately, the Greeks discovered a mountainous route that circumvented the Persian position, enabling them to encircle and eliminate the defenders. In early 330 BC, Alexander arrived at Persepolis, the ceremonial capital of the Persian Empire. His intention was to present himself as a liberator to the Persian populace and a legitimate successor to King Darius. However, he subsequently ordered the city to be plundered and set ablaze, ostensibly as retribution for the Persian invasion of Greece and the destruction of sacred temples in Athens in 480 BC. Following this, Alexander directed his efforts northward towards Media, where Darius had sought refuge in the royal city of Ecbatana. Alexander was resolute in his pursuit of Darius, yet the fugitive king fled eastward in hopes of amassing a new army in the provinces of Parthia, Bactria, and Sogdiana. This endeavor proved futile, as Darius was ultimately assassinated by one of his own governors, Bessus, who subsequently declared himself the new ruler of the empire. In response, Alexander ordered that Darius be interred in the royal tombs of Persepolis alongside his ancestors, before taking a moment to organize his expansive new empire. To govern the provinces on his behalf, Alexander appointed viceroys, retaining several Persians who had pledged their loyalty in their respective positions. He then resumed his eastern campaign with the objectives of locating and eliminating the usurper Bessus, subjugating the eastern provinces of the empire, and reaching the farthest reaches of the known world. In 330 BC, Alexander continued his advance eastward, targeting Bessus, who was claiming the title of rightful king, and aimed to subdue the eastern provinces of the empire. His first destination was Aria, located in present-day Afghanistan, where the Persian governor Satibarzanes had instigated a revolt after initially feigning submission to Alexander. This rebellion was swiftly quelled, culminating in the death of Satibarzanes in single combat at the hands of a Greek cavalry officer. In close proximity, Alexander established the city of Alexandria Ariana, modern-day Herat, as part of a series of cities he would eventually found, most of which would bear his name. As Alexander advanced towards Frada, he was reminded of the Macedonian court's long-standing tradition of intrigue and assassination. 6 years prior, his father, King Philip, had been murdered by his bodyguard. Alexander was then informed that Philotas, the commander of his companion cavalry, had uncovered a conspiracy to assassinate him, but had chosen to keep this information confidential. Philotas and his father, Parmenion, were esteemed commanders in Alexander's military ranks, having significantly contributed to his numerous victories. However, following Philotas's confession under duress, Alexander ordered his execution and subsequently dispatched assassins to Ecbatana, where Parmenion served as governor, to eliminate him before he could learn of his son's demise and potentially oppose Alexander. In 329 BCE, Alexander resumed his campaign against Bessus. During this expedition, he established the city of Alexandria Arachosia, present-day Kandahar in southern Afghanistan. Upon reaching Kunduz, Bessus was betrayed by his own followers and captured. Alexander sent him back to Persia to face execution for his treachery against the king. By this time, discontent had begun to grow among the Macedonian troops, many of whom had not returned home for several years, while their king appeared intent on unending conquests. Compounding their dissatisfaction, Alexander had started to adopt the customs and attire of the vanquished Persians, practices that his soldiers perceived as effeminate and decadent. A tragic incident occurred in Marikanda, modern Samarkand, when, after a heated and intoxicated dispute, Alexander killed Clytus the Black, one of his most capable generals, and the individual who had previously saved his life at the Battle of the Granicus. Although Alexander felt deep remorse for this act, his increasing arrogance alienated many of his former allies. His attempt to compel his Macedonian subjects to perform the traditional Persian ritual of proskynesis, which involved prostrating themselves before the king, was met with resistance, as the Greeks considered such an act blasphemous, believing that only a deity deserved such veneration. Consequently, Alexander was compelled to retract this demand. In Bactria, a conspiracy to assassinate Alexander was uncovered, with the principal conspirator being a royal page, Hermolius, a son of Macedonian nobility in attendance to the king. Hermolius harbored deep resentment towards Alexander due to a perceived grievance. Following their capture, he and his co-conspirators were subjected to torture and subsequently executed by stoning. Callisthenes, the official historian of Alexander, was also implicated in the plot and was imprisoned, where he ultimately died. During the summer of 327, according to historical accounts, Alexander became enamored with Roxana, the daughter of a Bactrian lord. Their marriage served not only as a personal union, but also as a strategic political alliance, aiding in the suppression of local insurrections against his authority and facilitating his continued military campaign into present-day Pakistan and India. Alexander prepared to conquer the easternmost provinces of the Persian Empire, which had yet to acknowledge his sovereignty. His strategy involved crossing the Hindu Kush Mountains and advancing into the Indus River Valley in two separate columns. His forces engaged in a series of skirmishes against the Aspetsi and Asakani tribes as they progressed into what is now the Swat Valley in northern Pakistan. Following a protracted siege, Alexander captured the Asakanian capital of Masaga, which was reportedly governed by a queen named Cleophas, who bore him a son and retained her throne. The ruler of Taxila, located near contemporary Islamabad, allied with Alexander, and together they confronted Porus, the king of Paravas, at the Battle of the Hydaspes. This engagement proved to be Alexander's most costly battle, as Porus's war elephants inflicted significant casualties on the Greek forces. Despite Porus's courageous leadership, the battle culminated in a decisive victory for Alexander, granting him control over the Punjab region. Ambitiously, Alexander sought to advance further into India to reach the Great River, which ancient Greek geographers identified as the boundary of the known world. However, at the river Hyphasis, now known as the Bees, his troops mutinied. After enduring a grueling campaign spanning thousands of miles, engaging in numerous battles, and being away from their homes for 8 years, the soldiers, having heard rumors of formidable armies awaiting them in India, refused to proceed any further. Although Alexander was incensed by this insubordination, he was compelled to retreat. He navigated the rivers of Punjab towards the sea, a journey that took 10 months. During this time, he defeated the Malians, but while leading an assault on their capital, he sustained a severe chest wound that nearly resulted in his death. Upon reaching the coastline, a segment of the army, commanded by Nearchus, embarked on ships and returned to Persia via maritime routes, navigating through the Straits of Hormuz and entering the Persian Gulf. This journey is recognized as one of the significant ancient explorations, as these waters were previously unfamiliar to the Greeks. Concurrently, Alexander led the remainder of the army overland through the Gedrosian Desert, located in present-day southern Pakistan. However, the extreme heat, coupled with a scarcity of food and water, resulted in considerable hardship and numerous fatalities among his troops. Upon his return to Persia, Alexander executed several of his viceroys and governors, who had been accused of unjust governance and the desecration of temples and tombs during his prolonged absence in the East. In Susa, he orchestrated a grand mass marriage between Macedonian officers and 80 Persian noblewomen to fortify the ties between his two realms. Alexander himself entered into matrimony with 2 Persian princesses. Additionally, he settled the debts of all his soldiers and mandated the training of 30,000 youths from across the empire in the Macedonian military arts. However, at Opis, a mutiny erupted among his Macedonian troops, who were discontented with Alexander's apparent favoritism towards Persian advisors and customs. In response, he executed the ringleaders and delivered a speech to his men, reminding them of their shared victories, which ultimately led to an emotional reconciliation. At Ecbatana, Alexander's closest and most trusted companion, Hephaestion, succumbed to fever, leaving the king in profound grief. He abstained from food for several days and declared a period of public mourning throughout the empire. Alexander subsequently conducted a successful campaign against the mountain raiders of Kossia, a feat that had eluded even the Persian kings. Upon his return to Babylon, he was greeted by envoys from various distant nations, acknowledging his greatness, including Ethiopians, Libyans, European Scythians, Lucanians, Etruscans, Gauls, and Iberians. At this time, his Bactrian wife Roxana was pregnant. However, as he prepared for his next campaign into Arabia and beyond, he developed a sudden fever and died shortly thereafter at the age of 32. The precise cause of Alexander's death remains uncertain, with possibilities including malaria, cholera, typhus, or poisoning. Notably, he died undefeated in battle, and his legacy as a brilliant, audacious military leader endures. His decade-long campaign resulted in the establishment of one of the largest empires in history, extending from Greece to Pakistan. Nevertheless, this vast empire was inherently unstable, reliant solely on his exceptional leadership and reputation. Alexander left no clear succession plan, leading to conflicts among his generals as they vied for their own territories. In the ensuing Wars of the Successors, both Alexander's widow Roxana and his young son were murdered. Furthermore, his gold sarcophagus, intended for burial in Macedonia, was intercepted and ultimately ended up in Alexandria, Egypt, with its current whereabouts remaining one of the great unsolved mysteries of history. Few individuals have exerted as significant an influence on the trajectory of history as Alexander the Great. The remarkable accomplishments of his brief existence initiated the Hellenistic Age, during which Greek cultural concepts disseminated throughout the regions of his former empire, merging with indigenous traditions to catalyze advancements in art, science, governance, and language. While some of the successor states to his vast empire were ephemeral, others persisted for several centuries. Ultimately, however, all would succumb to emerging powers, particularly the ascendant force of Rome in the West.